This house, which belongs to you, has been my home for almost 5 years. This coming January, I'll be leaving it with my wife and my daughters and my grandchildren. And I am proud, as you may imagine, to put that in the plural. We will return to our family home and to the life of private citizens. We pray that both of our sons-in-law may join us there in a time of peace. And to think of these things at this time of contest and transition in American affairs is to think naturally and soberly of the man who will decide so much of the future of all of our families. The man that you will choose as your president. That man, the 37th President of the United States, will find, I think, as I did, that all of the presidents who have gone before have left something of themselves behind. He will discover, as I did, that this Oval Office, while a lonely place in many ways, is filled with the presence and with the thoughts of men who bore the burden of national leadership in trying times.
Autumn of 1968 was a time when the burden of national leadership was indeed trying. On the night of October 31st, President Johnson, his family, and assistants gathered to watch his nationwide announcement calling for a complete halt to the bombing of North Vietnam, a statement he recorded only hours before. The decision had capped off what Special Assistant Walt Rostow called the most intensive period of diplomatic activity he had seen in 27 years in and out of Washington. North Vietnam had agreed to Saigon's representation in the Paris talks and understood that a bombing halt could not be sustained if the DMZ should be abused or heavily populated areas subjected to attack. Even though days of hard negotiating lay ahead, and days, perhaps months, of hard fighting in the battlefield, the President's decision was an important step on the road to peace. To every corner of the world, friend and enemy alike, his was the single voice speaking for the United States. But to one member of the viewing audience, it was only the familiar voice of grandfather. On the 2nd of November at the LBJ Ranch, President and Mrs. Johnson greeted the Apollo 7 astronauts and their families. Captain Walter Schirra and his wife Jo led the contingent, followed by engineers, administrators, and other key officials from both the Houston Space Center and the NASA Home Office in Washington. The guests on hand comprised a veritable who's who in space. Against the backdrop of the Texas Hill Country, the astronauts assured the President that a manned lunar landing was now within their grasp.
This morning we're celebrating a beginning of what we think is great promise. It's the opening of a new era in the history of manned space flight. We're ready to take that first great step out into the solar system and onto the surface of the nearest of the many mysterious worlds that surround us in space. Captain Schirra, Colonel Isley, And Mr. Cunningham, your flight in the new Apollo spacecraft was one of the most successful space missions that's ever been undertaken by this country or by any other country. And we just don't see how you could have done any better. I'm told that you accomplished as many mission objectives, 56 of them, in this one flight as were accomplished in the first 5 manned flights of the Gemini spacecraft.
In recognition of their outstanding contributions to spaceflight, the President awarded NASA's Exceptional Service Medal to astronauts Walter Cunningham, Don Isley, and their flight commander, Walter Schirra.
I'd like to say one word briefly. As command pilot of this mission, it is a treat for us to be here to receive these awards at the home of the President of the United States, the man who did so much to start this program out, and I'm sure will be as interested as we are to see this lunar mission come to the final goal of sending 3 men to the moon and bringing them back. Thank you, sir.
We have one other medal to present this morning. It is NASA's Distinguished Service Medal, and it's to be presented to NASA's most distinguished alumnus, James Webb. After working with NASA and its astronauts for more than a decade now, I'm running out of words to say about the accomplishments and progress that this organization has made. So I think I'm going to be very brief and just say to Jim Webb, you are the best.
Mr. President, I can only say that I do deeply appreciate your words and the citation. I do deeply appreciate the wonderful relationship that we have had both personally and officially. I think I might add that while I saw in your home a rocking chair and know you have one in Washington, I also have one. The staff of NASA gave me a Carolina rocker. And you may see me after the 20th of January with it under my arm, appearing so we can rock together on the front porch. Think big, make strong medicine. No matter what happens, this nation does have the kind of spacecraft that the press will ask Schirra about today. It has it because there has been this combination you referred to of government in-house capability, industrial capability, scientific capability, which must underlie it all, and brave men of action who are prepared to go out and put the equipment to use and to test it before it's put to use.
President Johnson turned the floor over to the 3 astronauts and sat back to enjoy a presidential news conference devoted entirely to life in outer space.
We'd like to tell you about our flight the easy way. The first thing I'd like to do is to project some of the film that was taken with the spacecraft camera. We had a 16mm camera on board. Each time I come back from a flight and I see these liftoffs, I'm not sure that I should have been there. We have progressed in photography to the point where we are now documenting the flight almost all the way through the last phases of boosted flight.
Following the filmed critique of the Apollo 7 space journey, James Webb, the NASA officials, and the 3 astronauts added more blocks to President Johnson's Friendship Walk. These blocks are perhaps the only guest book in the country permanently preserved in concrete. On November the 3rd, with the national elections only 2 days off, the last hours of the Democratic campaign took priority on the president's schedule. He arrived in Houston to lead a delegation of Texas congressmen and party officials in welcoming the Democrats' standard-bearer, Hubert Humphrey, along with Mrs. Humphrey, his constant campaign companion and active teammate. Few campaigns ever began with the uphill battle that had faced Mr. Humphrey. After the Democratic convention, the polls indicated he trailed the Republican opposition by 16 percentage points. Heckling disrupted a number of his rallies. After the first discouraging weeks, there were predictions of a defeat at the polls as severe as the Republican loss in 1964. By mid-autumn, however, as he began his long, slow climb, he saw the margin of percentage points that separated him from his opponent rapidly narrow. And now in the Houston Astrodome, after 98,000 miles of rigorous campaigning, the polls were virtually neck and neck.
In this election, a man who represents the faith of one America, a man who is progressive and compassionate, is seeking the office of president. That man, my friend and co-worker for more than 20 years, I can tell you is a healer and is a builder and will represent all the people all the time. He has a beautiful, able, wonderful teammate, Muriel Humphrey. I want her to stand up and take a bow here. For many years, Hubert and Muriel have stood by our side when we fought the battles of the people in the Senate, in the Executive Department, and in the White House. And I say to you that you'll never find a better First Lady than this one, and I hope you'll put her there next Tuesday.
What a day you give me in Houston in this great Astrodome. This is politics, Texas style, American style, big, enthusiastic, and friendly politics, and that's the Democratic style, too. Two days from now, the American people will exercise that great sovereign power of the right of the ballot, and they'll be entering the voting booth where they will make the great decision as to whom shall lead them, whom can they trust to work for a better America at home, and a stronger America at home and abroad. And the people will speak with that ballot, and they will be heard. I want you to speak with that ballot. The American people will make their decision about the kind of a world in which their children will live. And I want you, my fellow Americans, to vote your hopes, not your hates. To vote your faith, not your doubts. To vote your ideals, not your suspicion.
The campaign had ended for both Democrats and Republicans. The race had been hard fought by both sides and was virtually a toss-up. But in spite of the closeness, there were at least 2 Texas votes Mr. Humphrey could count on. As polling places closed throughout the East, it was apparent that George Wallace, the third-party candidate, had captured 5 southern states with their 45 electoral votes. With the big vote states of New York, Pennsylvania, and Michigan falling early into the Democratic column, the possibility emerged that neither major candidate could claim a majority in the Electoral College. If so, the election would be thrown into the House of Representatives, a constitutional crisis not seen since 1825.
This is CBS, Channel 5 in San Antonio, KENS TV.
It is indeed a toss-up. We've got those big states that are outstanding, New Jersey, Texas, Ohio, Illinois, and California. They are going to make the difference. Waiting to see if Mrs. Humphrey joins them on the stage.
We have, as you know, several of the very important states that are nip and tuck, where the decision, I'm sure, will not be known until sometime at least late tomorrow. And if you want to stay up to wait for all of that, I'm all for you.
The Vice President's 11th hour surge of popular support carried the election deadlocked until the following morning. Illinois, with its 26 electoral votes, finally swung into the Republican column, and with it, Hubert Humphrey's bid for the high office on Pennsylvania Avenue. For Richard Nixon, now president-elect, the long night was over. After the candidates had enjoyed a day of much-needed rest, the president invited both Mr. Humphrey and his running mate, Senator Ed Muskie of Maine, to breakfast in the executive mansion. He congratulated them both on the fine campaign they ran. In 20 years of national service, he remarked, "You have had no finer hours than those of the past few weeks, in which you awakened the support and interest of millions of people." On November 11th, President and Mrs. Johnson invited President-elect Richard Nixon and Mrs. Nixon to luncheon and a personally guided tour of the White House. Although the 2 leaders represented opposition parties with divergent views on many policy matters, they also knew the nation was passing through a critical period of foreign affairs. Their joint desire to speak with one voice on all urgent matters affecting national security underlined the tone of their initial discussions.
I realize, and President-elect Nixon realizes, that the American people expect and have a right to expect their government to efficiently function at all times. And both he and I are going to do everything that we possibly can to see that the wheels of government operate at maximum efficiency, not only from now until January the 20th, but for all time to come.
Like the family dining room with its elegant and historic appointments, each of the family rooms has a unique character. Often over the years, the rooms are redecorated and put to different use. With the White House floor plans as a guide, the First Lady familiarized Mrs. Nixon with the family quarters, describing the history of each room and explaining how time and circumstance brought about the various changes.
I express appreciation for the tour of some of the quarters of the White House that, despite the fact of my being in the administration for 8 years, I'd never seen before. I will not be as much of a stranger as I am at this point.
Shortly after 2 o'clock, President-elect Nixon was joined in the cabinet room by Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Director of Central Intelligence, and was given a very thorough briefing on matters which he was interested in.
The number one concern was achieving progress in the Paris talks. The president had ordered the bombing halt only after the North Vietnamese agreed to the inclusion of Saigon in the negotiations. At the last minute, however, President Thieu and Vice President Key reversed their position on joining the talks, having found that they did not have the necessary domestic political support. They and their supporters feared, despite American assurances to the contrary, that the Paris arrangements were structured so as to force them into a coalition government with the communists. Communist violations of the DMZ and Hanoi's propaganda designed to place the Viet Cong on an equal basis with the Saigon government intensified their fears. It appeared to some that both Saigon and Hanoi were waiting for the new administration to come into power, each hoping for a situation more suited to its own national interest.
If progress is to be made on matters like Vietnam, the current possible crisis in the Mideast, the relations between the United States and the Soviet Union with regard to certain outstanding matters, if progress is to be made in any of these fields, it can be made only if the parties on the other side realize that the current administration is setting forth policies that will be carried forward by the next administration. And the point that I think...
The assurances that the president received from Mr. Nixon and their accord on many urgent items on the national agenda gave promise of one of the most active and cordial transition periods in the history of the American presidency.
We might have some very significant action, progress toward peace.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you, gentlemen.
The presidency of Lyndon Johnson was nearing its 12th hour. Even though no new programs would be initiated, the customary pace at the White House continued without let-up. It seemed as if the office slogan of his deputy press secretary was in full force. Work hard, for the end is near. From luncheon table discussions with Secretary of Defense Clark Clifford to late evening sessions with other senior advisors, the president was the focal point of incoming reports and outgoing decisions that affected the nation's interests across the globe. On the 19th of November, with the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, William McChesney Martin, he reviewed the status of the financial talks in Bonn, Germany. His emissary to the talks, Henry Fowler, Secretary of the Treasury, was one of 10 finance ministers sitting in this emergency session. The French currency, which only a year earlier had been among the most stable in the world, was being threatened with almost certain devaluation, a crisis that could have profound effects on the other major world currencies. Secretary of State Dean Rusk had landed only moments earlier at Andrews Air Force Base. He reported immediately to the president on the outcome of his meeting with the NATO ministers in Brussels.
I would like to fill you in on the background of the program, its accomplishments, and where we see the poverty program going in the years to come.
Throughout the month, the special cabinet presentations continued. This series of intense searching reports, begun in September, sought to review programs affecting every aspect of national life and to underscore the unfinished tasks on the agenda.
Which incidentally involved some 119 projects that were authorized at that time. They went to 12 cities 9 states, 6 rural areas, and 1 Indian reservation. They included CAP, Job Corps.
What kind of training have you found to be most successful in the Job Corps?
Auto mechanics is a very important one. Perhaps one of the most successful, where we have been able to fund it, has been large, heavy equipment training. We have such a project down at San Marcos in the Job Corps camp down there. With the trouble with the program is that it takes massive capital costs to get this earth-moving type equipment and train these kids. But the results are tremendous in terms of placement and in terms of the wage rates that result from that kind of training.
It was a time, too, for farewells. With exactly 2 months remaining in office, President Johnson began giving thanks to the many select groups of people who had served the administration. The White House police, the Secret Service, the military aides, secretaries, telephone operators, and the countless numbers of specialists who make the executive machinery work smoothly and effectively. The President introduced many members of his staff to Vice President-elect Spiro Agnew as part of an overall briefing on the 20th of November.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States of America.
Out of 200 million Americans, I have awarded only 30 Congressional Medals of Honor. And to these modest men who never thought that they would be here any more than I ever thought I would be where I am, I want to remind you of what another president said upon another occasion, that I'd rather be able to have that blue band around my neck with a Congressional Medal of Honor than to be the President of the United States. Above and beyond the call of duty. 5 heroic sons of America come to us today from the tortured fields of Vietnam. These 5 soldiers, in their separate moments of supreme testing, summoned a degree of courage that stirs wonder and respect and an overpowering pride in all of us. Through their spectacular courage, they set themselves apart in a very select company. They represent the contribution of more than 500,000 young Americans to a world of order and of peace.
The most frustrating burden the President carried was the war in Vietnam. Fought half a world away, the war called for military limitations and restrictions not fully understood by many average Americans. And yet, average Americans were daily put to the extreme test. Even though progress towards peace in Vietnam was frustratingly slow, in other areas of foreign affairs and domestic activity, there was a record of solid achievement. At the annual dinner of the National Urban League, the President highlighted some of this record.
If we have planted one idea in the American consciousness, I hope it is this: every man, woman, and child has at least one property right. It is the right to opportunity. The task of government and business and labor and of the news media and of the schools and the organizations like the Urban League is to protect and to extend that right, to make it just as real to the child of Harlem as it is to the child of the most prosperous suburb.
At the 20th anniversary of the National Heart Institute, the President underscored the pace-setting record medicine was making under federal support.
In the 20 years since this institute was founded, we have amassed more knowledge about the heart and about its diseases than mankind gained in all the previous history. We have reduced the death rate from high blood pressure by nearly 50% in the last 10 years. We have developed new surgical techniques. We have some of the distinguished surgeons here with us this morning, I'm glad to say. We've developed heart-lung machines, we've developed open-heart surgery, and we've made many other breakthroughs.
Whether help for veterans, national parks for the city dweller, protection for the consumer, President Johnson's 5 years of legislative achievement would have profound impact on all Americans, particularly in those areas serving the most basic of human needs: health, education, housing, and equal opportunities. Early in his term, he recognized the value of documenting the workings of the executive branch of government so that future scholars could study the day-by-day dynamics of the presidency. Various committees comprised of historians, audiovisual experts, exhibit designers, educators, and architects had been meeting regularly to implement a unique repository of American history, the Lyndon B. Johnson Library, to stand on the campus of the University of Texas. The library committees, more often than not, congregated in the treaty room of the White House. The historic cabinet table of President Grant was just the right size for spreading out blueprints and display models. The library, when completed, would preserve in letters and photographs, in documents and on motion picture film, the public service career of Lyndon Johnson. In one of the more poignant moments of the month, the Texas State Society gave a party in the Smithsonian Institution in honor of the President and Mrs. Johnson's 34th wedding anniversary. Of the 700 people who gathered to greet the Johnsons, some were congressmen and agency officials, but most claimed nothing more than to have come from Texas. Guests who had known the splendor of evenings at the White House claimed the reception for the National Council on the Arts on November 21st to be the most colorful and exciting evening in memory. The Alvin Ailey Dance Troupe staged an unforgettable performance in the East Room to a star-studded audience comprised of the greatest names in the arts. The President took great satisfaction in Chairman Roger Stevens' final report, highlighting the Council's achievements toward enriching the arts across the land. From the report, it was evident that no president in history had contributed as much to the growth of American arts and culture as had President Johnson during these 5 active and lively years of encouraging the theater, the gallery, the concert hall, The final days of November ended on a note of hope. The President received word from Paris that a new and hopeful phase in the negotiations had opened. The government of the Republic of Vietnam announced it would shortly send a delegation to Paris to join in the search for the elusive peace. He gathered with his family and close friends to celebrate Thanksgiving on the LBJ Ranch. The President proudly handed out snapshots of Lucy's brief but memorable reunion with her husband, Pat Nugent, during 5 very short days on the beaches of Hawaii. The youngest airman first class in the service held frank and open discussions with his commander-in-chief on all matters affecting their respective spheres of interest. Long after the traditional festivities were forgotten and the poignant family moments were relegated to memory, the true meaning of November 1968 would be best recalled among the words of the President's annual Thanksgiving proclamation. In spite of the tumultuous events of 1968, he said, "Let us give thanks for the endurance and stability of our democracy as we prepare once more for an orderly transition of authority. For the renewed determination on the part of millions of Americans to bridge our divisions. For the beginning of talks with our adversaries that will, we pray, lead to peace in Vietnam."